Welcome to the second episode in a Legendarium series about Russia's time of troubles. In Part 2, Reign of the False Tsars, we will talk about how the men who wished to rule Russia faced terrible obstacles because they did not have a blood connection to Ivan the Terrible. In the Russian mind, only a true heir of Ivan the Terrible could sit upon the throne. If anyone else did, then God would punish the Russian people with plagues on a biblical scale. It would not be hard to see the famine of 1601 through 1603 as divine wrath. Thus, when word came that Prince Dmitri still lived and called upon the Russians to restore his birthright, they readily believed him. The man known as the first False Dimitri, supposedly killed by accident more than 10 years ago, emerged in Poland. Somehow he won over the Polish nobility and even won the support of the Jesuits. In exchange for their support, they extracted a promise from the False Dimitri to convert Russia from Eastern Orthodoxy to Catholicism. During the year 1604, with a small band of Poles, Cossacks, and peasant refugees who fled the famine, the first False Dimitri invaded Russia. Swarms of hungry migrants in the south turned out in the streets to cheer and litter his path with flowers. Boris Godunov, the reigning Tsar, arrived with an army to defend his throne. Yet, in a moment that the Russians surely saw as a final expression of divine anger, Tsar Boris died before the campaign could even begin, which proved devastating to his political career. The Godunov family arranged for Boris's son Fyodor II to become Tsar, but he only reigned for a few weeks. The first False Dimitri entered Moscow in triumph and received his crown to the cheering of crowds. Tsar Fyodor II and his mother were less happy because they went into a dungeon where the guards discreetly strangled them. Now, how did so many people fail to recognize Dmitri as someone other than the rightful Tsar? It is important to note that in a time before photography, biometrics, or fingerprints, it could be difficult to positively identify anybody. Even someone who knew a long-dead person would be drawing on fading memories. Most would have nothing but images on coins and paintings to go on. Indeed, a person in those days could easily vanish from one community, re-emerge in another with a new name, and no one would be the wiser. Death carried a much greater mystery in a time of primitive medical science. With an accurate autopsy impossible to carry out, people could just as easily attribute a sudden death to Satan's mischief or a rotten bowl of cherries as a heart attack. But regardless of the mysteries of death, the young man called the first False Dimitri reigned for only 13 months. During that time, he alienated and angered Muscovites with his large retinue of Catholic Poles. However, the first False Dimitri lost any remaining support when he married the Polish princess Marina Mindzech in May 1606. In a wedding heavily attended by Catholic Poles. Quarrels, fistfights, and even riots broke out between the Tsar's Polish entourage and Orthodox Muscovites. Finally, Prince Vasily Shuisky organized a party of Russian patriots in storming the palace and bursting into Dmitri's bedroom. The false Tsar broke his leg as he hurled himself out a window, and the Russians shot him dead as he tried to limp away. Vasily Shuisky celebrated his victory by dragging the first False Dimitri's carcass by a rope tied around his feet and genitals, then put him on display so that people could poke at him with sticks. Shuisky became the next Tsar by acclamation, and for his first act, he sent his predecessor home by burning his ashes, loading them into a cannon, and then firing it in the direction of Catholic Poland. In a purge of Poles from the court that followed, 420 of Dmitri's followers perished, and the rest, rather wisely, disappeared. Despite his victory, Tsar Vasily Shuisky found himself in an awkward spot. When Boris Godunov sat on the throne, Shuisky led the inquiry, which concluded that Prince Dmitri died in a bizarre accidental suicide more than a decade ago, rather than the murder that so many people suspected Boris Godunov had orchestrated. So, Tsar Vasily obtained the corpse of a young boy who died during the famine years and declared him to be the real Dmitri, buried in a village called Uglich. And since the real Dmitri had died far from Moscow, that meant, at least in Shuisky's mind, that he couldn't possibly have murdered him. Vasily Shuisky ordered the remains hauled to Moscow and then paraded them through the streets on a wagon. Soon after, cooperative Orthodox clergy conveniently proclaimed that Dmitri's corpse began curing lepers and cripples. The clergy even proved compliant enough to declare Dmitri not only dead and definitely not murdered, but a saint. As an additional measure, Tsar Vasily Shuisky found a living relative of Ivan the Terrible to promote. He removed Fyodor Romanov, now Brother Filaret, from his monastery. Yet since Brother Filaret remained trapped by his monastic vows, Tsar Vasily made him Patriarch of the Russian Church. Yet Shuisky's grip on the throne remained fragile. He had no direct blood tie to Ivan the Terrible, which made him illegitimate in the eyes of the Russian people. Could he keep the throne once the glow of his victory wore off? We will find out in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this installment of the Legendarium. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comment section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.